what is going to happen to work? How can I still build a career? Are there going to be jobs left?
If there's something terrible that happens with AI, we should be looking for the people behind it, not just at the AI. Because there's no way in which people develop a technology that, you don't let it out into the wild without knowing what it's going to do.
This is Mark Kennedy, professor in strategy and organizational behavior who studied AI before it was a thing in the 1980s in Stanford. This episode is for everyone who thinks about, is worried about where the future of work is heading with AI. If you ever thought about becoming a content creator, a startup, we'll talk about how those tools empower us and also what you can do to create a category for yourself, a niche for yourself, where you can be known for something. And it's a deeply empowering and human way to look at what's ahead and how to thrive in the AI economy.
We're all hearing all of these prognostications about what's going to happen, what the future's going to look like. For the ones that are right, there's going to be change in it that's going to present opportunities for adventure and also for calamity. So the quest for me is, if we can't put every genie that we come up with back in the bottle, then we really need to take up the quest of figuring out how we can make it positive. And one of the key things that I think a lot about is
our mind, our intelligence might be replaced in a quite versatile way. What should I study? What skills should I acquire? How can I put myself in a position where I can have a career?
You still are the maker, but you're doing it through an AI that is like your coding assistant. What are you good at that humans are good at? But you ask, will there be an explosion in that? And I think that there will be an implosion.
You have to explain that.
Well,
Mark, thank you for being here.
Pleasure.
You're a professor of mine at Imperial Business School, and I had the pleasure
Me too.
of having a seminar together, and we talked about many of the things that go wrong in the world. And the most interesting discussion we had, or one of the most interesting, but certainly most pressing and timely, were around AI, what it means for society, for companies, and especially for people my age. And so I couldn't be more excited to have that conversation with you about AI. And to set the scene a little bit, just last week, there was a new scenario published from one of the leading forecasters, ex-OpenAI employee out of the AI Futures project. And he came on Diary of a CEO and he said, there's a 70% chance this is going to go horribly wrong. And so there's apocalypse on one side. And on the other side, Sam and Demis, they all say, oh, we might have, we're in the age of abundance and we're going to usher in there scientific progress and productivity through the roof. But what everyone kind of agrees on is that there's going to be huge disruption and that the future of work there's a complete question mark behind that. And what the thing that is most pressing for me and people in my audience listening right now, they will want to know what is going to happen to work. How can I still build a career? Are there going to be jobs left? And what we can do about it. So this is a very long way to say, this is what we're going to talk about. And this is what I want your input on and your thoughts. In 2019, you helped host a policy and research forum on AI in your role as the leader of the Imperial Data Science Institute. And back then you said, which is quite prescient, you said the crystal ball is cracked, speaking of AI and what it's going to do to work and society. What did you mean by that?
Well, what I was trying to say is that there were a lot of predictions out there that were of the ilk that is sort of henny penny, saying the sky is falling. And to a degree, we still have that. We have people saying, for example, that quote, 70% chance of some sort of a calamity. And, I by the way, I read that quote and I thought about it and I was like, okay, there's two problems with this. Number one is it's giving the agency to the AI. And I think it would be reasonable to say if there's something terrible that happens with AI, we should be looking for the people behind it, not just at the AI. Because there's no way in which people develop a technology that, you don't let it out into the wild without knowing what it's going to do and so just sort of let it go crazy. So I think we need to insist on that. And the second thing that I think is wrong with that is the idea that you could be as precise as something like 70%. So to the crystal ball is cracked. I mean, that's the impression of accuracy where there really isn't much. So what I was trying to say at the time is that all these forecasts are subject to massively wide confidence intervals about what's actually going to happen. And so what's important in my way of thinking is, instead of telling me what exactly you think is going to happen and when, because that's just clickbait, tell me why. Tell me what's going to need to be in place. What are the antecedents to that? What are the things that we should be watching for along the way? That's much more valuable. It gives you something that you can do rather than just go away and bum out and say, oh my gosh, 70% chance of Armageddon, or, no one's going to have a job, or, something like that.
Very interesting. I mean, so that 70% figure, the originator is very clear that many different ways and things in which things might go wrong. And it's just to kind of alarm people. There is quite a high probability. Like if you played Russian roulette and there was a 70% chance, right, that you either get fabulously rich or you're dead, you would never ever do that. So even if it's 30% or 20 or 10%, you probably won't go for I'm either super rich or I'm dead, right? So in that way, it's informative. To go back though to 2019, very prescient. What were the predictions at the time that you were reacting to, and what were your own thoughts of what's going to happen with AI?
At that time, the original sort of 2013 working paper from Frey and Osborne at Oxford was still something people were widely talking about. Klaus Schwab had already written the thing about the Fourth Industrial Revolution. There were as well books by people like Lee, who was saying, China's going to be a superpower and all these jobs are going to go away, but let's look at which ones are more at risk, which was a nice addition to the thing. But it was a lot focused about jobs. And just at that time, places like McKinsey were trying to say, what about tasks? Shouldn't we be looking at that? And so partly what I was just trying to do is to say, these predictions are just not even about the right thing. And there's not enough why in it. It is more just like what you were saying, an alarm bell.
Right.
So I don't think that's wrong. It's important to let people know that there's something to be concerned about. So that kind of thing serves a purpose. But I didn't particularly want to just, beat a drum and say, everybody run for the hills. I more wanted to say, we should really try to be responsible for this stuff, figure out what's going on, and say something that people can work with.
Okay. And who are you, Mark Kennedy, to talk about the topics we'll talk about, and which is AI, the future of work, what it's going to do to society, and how to navigate that? What experiences, references, expertise are you drawing on to educate us on those topics?
So you already mentioned that I've been leading the data science unit at Imperial. We now call it Data Science Imperial. It was founded as Data Science Institute. I'm a professor in strategy and organizational behavior. So I'm spanning those different worlds, which is kind of an interdisciplinary mashup that makes me a bit of a mutt intellectually. but it's worse than that. So my undergraduate was a degree at Stanford called Philosophy and Logical Formal Systems, which morphed into Symbolic Systems the year that I graduated. I quite
Which
like
is
that
short, which is long for AI.
Yeah. So
Early nascent stages of AI.
well, okay. We didn't think it was nascent stages because, from our standpoint, I was taking classes from people who were at the Dartmouth workshop in 1956 where the term AI was coined. And, to us, they were the OGs, sadly, many, not all, but, that generation is now passing. And so my friends and people like me, we're like, the still alive, not really OG, but people who've been around for a while. I did not stay in that. I went into a startup that was doing optical character recognition software, and I was just a software grunt. But I left all that and I went to go get an MBA. I thought, if I want to make an impact in business, I should do that. I came back to the Bay Area from Chicago to work for this consulting firm. And a professor of mine had invited me to join the PhD program at Northwestern. And I turned it down. I was like, I can't imagine, being poor for 5 more years. Many years later.
My situation right now.
Yeah, exactly. You know what I'm talking about. So I walked away and he was like, you won't be back. And I was like, let's see. I did go back. So that's what I mean earlier about, a person who has kind of done a bunch of different things. And I've walked away from stuff I learned how to do and became pretty good at that I didn't think I would come back to. But, I've always come back to this stuff. So I think I'm a guy who's like trying to figure out what I want to be as I grow up, as I said. I like to joke that I have, anxiety deficit disorder. You wouldn't just do these things if you weren't a little unhinged. My poor family. But it's been a great adventure. So in a way,
maybe it's adventure deficit disorder.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is. But I actually have been filling that deficit with a lot of adventures. So I think fundamentally, I'm like one of these people who's more on a quest than just trying to do a job. And I've been looking for the thing that feels like the next, part of the quest for me.
And for people who just clicked on this episode and are wondering what they get, what quest, what intellectual adventure are you going to take us on?
We're all hearing all of these prognostications about what's going to happen, what the future's going to look like. Most of them aren't meaningfully right. Some of them will be right. For the ones that are right, there's going to be change in it that's going to present opportunities for adventure and also for calamity. So the quest for me is, if we can't put every genie that we come up with back in the bottle, and I think that's going to be really hard to do with AI, and I'm personally not for it. I know people are, and we can, agree and disagree, but I'm not for it. So if we're not going to somehow try to just jam it all back in a bottle and say, we're not doing that, let's go back to being hunter-gatherers or whatever, then we really need to take up the quest of figuring out how we can make it positive. And one of the key things that I think a lot about is, what are people going to do? How do we interface with it? And, so my ideas about how to do that are maybe non-traditional. It's not that it's automatically a good or a bad thing. It's about how we embrace this and make it a good thing. And that's an adventure. I think that's a cool adventure.
So is AI the best thing or the worst thing that could happen to people in my age that just started work or are studying right now and gonna enter the job market very soon?
Well, I know that it's not helpful for me to dodge questions, but what I would say is, it's not that it's the best or the worst. It's more, it's a hard thing. It's definitely hard. AI is very unlike most prior substitutions of some kind of technology or capital for labor. So whereas historically the economics literature basically, has a lot of studies that show that technologies tend to put lower paid workers at risk of losing their jobs. That is not happening with AI.
Like what we saw with farmers, right? We were 95% farmers. Then came the agricultural revolution. Then we saw it with the industrial revolution. People were basically not trading the time, but trading their muscle. So, and that was quite dangerous work that was replaced. But
Yeah.
now our mind, our intelligence might be replaced in a quite versatile way, right? It's a general purpose technology, which makes things quite tricky.
Yeah. So, I mean, best or worse then, it's hard because the things that you might do, let's say as a 25, 30-year-old, or new university graduate, in many fields, not every field, there is a pyramid of people in different kinds of jobs. So there's a lot of people that enter, and then fewer people advance. And so you get this kind of pyramid-like structure. So the base of that pyramid is typically younger people. It's that whole pyramid of people doing whatever that thing is that provide us the data that we learn from that allows us to build AI to do different kinds of things. At some point, when you're affecting the demand for labor in even a professional job, you start to see not just a theory about job cuts, but slowdowns in hiring. This is the first year that I am seeing and hearing from people saying, we are hiring fewer people. I've had conversations with people at very large firms that are big hirers from universities. I'm not going to give away, the details of what firms they are separately, who told me two of these sort of like flagship organizations were hiring 30% fewer people this year. That's and it's the first year where they've done that. And in both situations, they were, kudos to them for this pretty clear, like we don't actually have a really accurate view of how many fewer people we need. We just know we don't need as many people. So it's not that they're going out and saying, okay, let's open the veins and just bleed out a bunch of people, but they are saying, let's take fewer in. So what happens over the next few years? Probably more of that kind of thing. And the reason I say it's hard is that disproportionately hits people who are vulnerable to being made, redundant, because with productivity gains from automation and augmentation, we don't need as many people to do that thing anymore. So then the question is, who's vulnerable? And people with less experience are vulnerable.
Students.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, it's tricky though, because it's not as simple as that. It's also people with more experience who are behind. So let's say that you're, 40 plus, 50 plus, you're getting to the age like me where you're definitely not just like marketable because you're young. If you don't know what's going on and you have a lot of learning to do, it's not too late. Never say that, but get going. Because the people that are on top of this, there's kind of this weird bifurcated experience. Like I have all these conversations with people who are vintage like me. And, the reactions that people are having is this is not fair. Like I have all this background, I have all this knowledge, and now I have tools that enable me to do stuff that, usually would be done by a younger person.
Mm.
It kind of doesn't feel completely right, but it's also a bit exciting to be able to do all that. So that's hard on young people, and it's hard on also people who are more experienced that aren't intrepid or kind of fearless or current enough to just go launch themselves into these things.
Right. I mean, just to back what you said, so the Stanford's Digital Economy Lab looked at kind of the whole economy and is one of the most authoritative sources on what is going to do to the labor market. And they found that entry-level workers in most AI-exposed roles are already seeing 16% lower job growth than their peers in less exposed fields. This is more conservative than the 30% number that you just mentioned, but it's quite, what is so challenging about that is that a lot of those jobs are coding or being in AI, being in machine learning, and having technical skills. Where I remember when I went to school and when I graduated from high school, which is not that long ago, everyone said get a very technical degree, like go into coding, go into AI. Wasn't a thing yet, but those are some of the jobs that are most at risk. And it's not just that those are most at risk. That number is going to grow, and as AI gets better and is better at augmenting different tasks, and like many different, it's going to learn to get better at those like fuzzier, less well specified tasks and roles as well, that share is going to grow. So I'm sighing because I got lucky that I got into a PhD where I'm kind of guarded, and I can learn, and I can play with those tools. But I've heard from so many like friends that even went to top schools like Harvard and Oxford, they struggled to find a job for months, like a whole year, sending hundreds of applications. Like if it's hard for people coming out of the best institutions, having studied something really hard, we are all very right to be scared. Now, I know you have kids. They are older than me.
Just, yeah, I would think. Yeah.
Say they would say, Dad, what should I study? What skills should I acquire? How can I put myself in a position where I can have a career? I don't even want to say a job, because there might not be jobs to train for anymore. I want to have a career. What should I study? What skills should I develop? What should I do, Dad?
I'm the super boringest person ever to ask that question of, because I have one answer for it, which is, do you. Like if you are trying to force fit to what's going to be, a job that's out there, and you're using some point prediction from today about what that is, good luck. You're going to be miserable in some crap job that is not for you. So like, and maybe it's easy for me to say because I had some kind of very supportive parents who were also very smart and helped me through, all the school troubles that, any kid would have, and ended up with a good education in different ways and opportunities that came out of that. But, I definitely, studying philosophy in, the 1980s and doing AI, it wasn't like, oh, wow, that's so cool. That's so hot. Like if you talk about that, people looked at you like you had three eyes.
Right.
I knew that there was a whole cool ecosystem in that was going on, but it was not widely known, and it wasn't even something that was in the popular press. So I'm not fundamentally a believer in trying to sort of target your life toward demand for work. Now, it'd be foolish to say I'm going to become a builder of something that no one will ever buy anymore, if selling it was going to need to be your livelihood. So between those two, there's some sort of balance, I think, to be had.
So should people still go to university? And like, if I had to press you, like, I'm not going to let you off the hook with do whatever you like, because I think you do have like a sense of where things are going and what kind of skills or what kind of jobs or careers might be more out there. So for the general person, and I'm pressing you to, these are like a few skills, a few things that you should absolutely try to do, or like that are like general purpose, no matter
Okay,
what
let me give like
job you want to do.
a general sort of.
Yes, like for the median person.
So like if your thought is, I don't know, like 10 or 15 years ago, I remember hearing people that were studying to get a Microsoft certification in something or other that had a lot of syllables and sounded like dull as watching paint dry to me. But it was a way to go get a job. once I know how to do this, super techie thing, because I have this certification, then I will get a job. And honestly, that used to work. Probably that's not a good idea now.
Mm.
Because what you're doing is you're learning how to do exactly the kind of thing that AI is going to be pretty good at doing. So we have a new course coming out from DSI at Imperial that isn't out yet, so you can't get it yet, but it's called How to Speak AI. And it's just about the fact that doing many of the things that we used to do, like by coding or, doing something that was more artisanal, you still are the maker, but you're doing it through an AI that is like your coding assistant. And that fundamentally changes how all this stuff works. So there's a whole class of stuff that you used to have somebody like me who would come along. In the late 20 teens, I was on this digital skills task force for the Lord Mayor for the City of London. There's a bunch of interesting people, and it's like everybody was there saying, well, we should spend more money on kind of this, that, and the other, and things that we really don't need people to train to learn how to do now. So I would say a general heuristic is, what are you good at that humans are good at? And everybody's good at something that humans are good at. And if your thought was going to be like, I'm going to be good at the thing that computers are good at, probably not a great choice. So what's an example of that? Like, I don't know, go back 100 years. If you were an idiot savant, and that's not a pejorative thing, that's just a description of somebody who's like freakishly good at doing a particular kind of task. And, your thing was that you could do impossibly complicated sums or multiplications or divisions or, calculations in your head. We go back 200 years, there's definitely places for you. And it's not that that's not still really a cool thing to be able to do at a certain kind of party, maybe a pretty nerdy party, but we actually don't really need that so much now because computers are really good at that. Whereas there are things that people are really good at that are still things we need a lot. Here's an example.
Yeah, give me like
a person in a hospital who goes, an orderly often, who goes into a hospital room and turns a patient over in the bed. There's people who do that are, honest to God, superstars at that job. They come and they make the patient in the bed, who they have to put their hands on and touch and move all over, they make them comfortable. They give them a moment of sunshine in a difficult time, and they move them where they need to be without pain and without fear because they're so good at it. The person's confident and trusting the whole time. The opposite end of that spectrum, there's a person that does that job and is frequently injured. It's dangerous. You can injure your back. You really got to know what you're doing. Or they can go in and accomplish that and they're always injury-free, but people don't leave feeling great. The patients feel not great. So that's a kind of thing. There's something that a human is doing there that's a bit of a superpower, and it's massively underpaid.
Right. It is.
It really is.
And there might be a premium for that. So what? Everything that involves hands, we won't talk about robotics. I think that is still a little further out in the future. And you probably don't want, if you're in a hospital, you don't want to be turned over by a robot. So,
well, not yet anyway. And even if you were doing it, you'd want it to be able to do that super, very
gently,
human thing.
Yeah.
And that's my point, is that there's things that people do with each other, especially where their humanity is absolutely, at the core of whatever the value is in that work.
Yeah. Also, I think everything that involves connection, you mentioned physical touch, or like being like still moving things around, or like being more artistic, and everything that, I don't know, you said human touch, so human creativity, human
perception,
expression, emotion,
judgment.
right?
So I know you're about to ask me a question, but I can't resist but throw this in. I saw this really dumb Instagram post this morning, which moved me. And it was a story, maybe apocryphal, about some teenage kid working in a theater in Chicago or Illinois somewhere, who was on the chopping block to get fired from his job because he was letting in people who didn't pay to get into the theater to see the film. And it turned out that someone decided to ask what was going on before this kid was fired. This is the story anyway. And it turns out that this was a couple that came in, they're retirees. They wanted to see a film. They didn't have enough money to make the tickets on that day. So the kid took the money that they had, gave them tickets anyway, put it in the till, didn't all quite match. And then started letting them come every week. So this was discovered on a camera. The bosses got to the bottom of this, and they were like, we shouldn't fire this kid, actually. So they kept the kid, and they started a program where seniors could come and go to a film one day a week, one showing a week, whatever, on some special deal or free. I don't even know what it was, but that's an example of something intensely human. The kid thought to ask what is going on, decided to take the risk and be compassionate. And then the boss looking over that was like, yeah, we're not just going to follow the rule. We're going to make a new one. And it's because you showed us this is a good thing to do. So people are doing stuff like that all the time. And that's the kind of thing that makes life better.
On that note of not following the rule and making new rules, I think, so kind of my perspective on the whole AI thing is that it's going to be difficult for employees, like people that, just want like a safe corporate career, that might be a bit cookie cutter, but you get your skills, like you have a clear career progression. So because there's going to be so many incentives for companies to cut those analyst jobs, which is how young people like me get, the foot into the industry and the expertise that then make them more valuable to go up. But we talked about breaking the rules, and entrepreneurs. I think it's going to be great for entrepreneurs. And I want to throw an idea at you. So, now you mentioned influencer earlier, and you said, and to back this up, over 200 million people worldwide now call themselves content creators. Among 8 to 12-year-olds, YouTuber beats doctor, astronaut, and every other traditional career as number one dream job. And it's not just kids. 41% of adults across all ages say they'll become a content creator given the chance. So we've seen that evolution and that creation of a job that didn't exist. Why? Because we had those things, a supercomputer in our pocket with a decent camera and a screen to interact with social media that made that career possible. Now, if I think about how the future economy, the landscape of the future economy is going to look like, we're going to not only have this in our pockets, but we're going to have not supercomputers, but super intelligent computers that we can spin up different AI agents and get and have all this augmentation of so many things. So I'm saying all of this to say, are we going to see an explosion of the equivalent of influencer careers, but one-person startups? What are your thoughts on that? And if you think this landscape might shift in that direction, this trend might continue, how should people go about that?
Well, I suspect we're going to see healthy growth in that. And we're going to have, just as in the early 20th century in the United States, there was this kind of Horatio Alger set of stories that was like rags to riches. We're going to have a lot of stories like that. Like, here's a person that started a one-person company, and it's now like, they're personally a unicorn.
Unicorn.
Exactly.
One-person unicorn.
And I think we'll have stories like that. But you asked, will there be an explosion in that? And I think that there will be an implosion
You have to explain that.
Well, like, it's going to happen. Is it going to happen so much that we would look back and say that's an explosion? I doubt it. And so we're in kind of a Wild West stage of this where it's not only possible to do this yourself, which is amazing, by the way. I think that's something to be celebrated. And I think if you're thinking about it, you should do it. With the right provisos. Don't send me hate mail if it doesn't go well. But it's also really hard to build these things not by yourself, because there aren't the infrastructures and supports, toolkits, kind of back office things to make it easier. So like doing what you're doing, if you're a creator on a podcast, a lot of people, when they get started, they're their own editor, they're their own, guest booker. You do everything.
Guys, you just see this and it's like lands on YouTube and on Spotify, and you think like, oh, cool. They just sat down and had a conversation. It's many hours of, guest booking, interview prep, research, find the guest in the first place, sitting down.
So,
and then
so
editing.
you're like the chief cook and bottle washer across everything.
Yeah, it's like,
right?
it's a 20-person job, but like doing it.
Okay, exactly. So now imagine that you were doing this in some future time, and let's say you're the talent, okay? And there's a studio that isn't just a studio, a space, like we're in a space that is a studio, but it's a studio in the sense of a studio system. So it's looking for people like you. It has a contract for you. It has all the backing that you need to do. And if you can pass a few stage gates, then you're in that system. Do you give away some value to them? Yes, you do. But ask any A-lister, let's say, who's a, Hollywood star, how do they feel about giving away that value? And then they'll rightfully complain about how they have to pay this and that and the other person, just all this money. But people really make it. So what's going to happen with this whole domain is more of a studio system will come up. And, there will be already the distribution is heading that way. The production end could be eventually more that way. The fact that, production can be simple is brilliant. We love that. But it doesn't mean really that you actually want to do all 20 of those jobs yourself.
No. If I would have a cheap way or an agency saying, hey, we're going to do all of this, you can focus on the fun stuff, of course, I'll take that.
And the agency, by the way, might be employing a lot of agents, and AI to do some of that stuff. But the company that has that tech stack to make your work more focused on the human part, like we were talking about, you're gonna want to buy that service when it's good enough.
Yeah. Also, I mean, let's say this pans out. And I think we already seen this. Steven.com, Stephen Bartlett's kind of company is trying to build that for creators. But I mean, creator or influencer is just one job. I'm also thinking of people that have an idea for a startup. I think it's very difficult to be an entrepreneur. There's many things that even with AI tools, I didn't know I'm signing up for, and it would still take that long. One thing that, I think the way you orchestrate AIs, etc., you can learn that. And if you're dedicated, you want to build something, you can. I think one important shift to make cognitively that I would love to have your take on is when you go through school, everyone is on the same or very similar ladders, or there's ladders that you can climb. Doctor, engineer, there's a corporate ladder, it's called ladder for a reason. And that world is largely a world where you try to be the best at this ladder, right? And the problem with trying to be on a ladder where you get rewarded for being the best is that there can only be one person that is being the best. What I would love people to take away from this conversation is that, first of all, with ladders disappearing, and even if they don't disappear in the next 1 or 2 years, is ask yourself, is this ladder that I'm climbing leaned against the right wall? Like, do I want to actually climb this ladder, or was this just something that was put in front of me or was had to choose when I was 18 and had to study something. So this is number one. And number two is, if you don't want to climb that ladder, if those ladders don't exist anymore, it's like, what do you do? What's the alternative? And what I would encourage people to do, and Tim Ferriss talks about this idea a lot. He's author of the 4-Hour Work Week and podcast host of the Tim Ferriss Show, who is largely the person to make podcasting what it is today. He says, try to be a category of one. So I'm starting a podcast. Now I could say I'm trying to be the biggest podcast in the world. Guess what? Everyone is trying that and is like, I'm not going to get there. And if so, like the question is that's a ladder that just, society puts in front of you. But what I'm trying to do is become a category for a type of podcast that my niche of people would want to watch. What that niche for me is people who want to do good in the world and do want to do well without sacrificing one for the other. And that tends to be people my age. So that's the niche I'm trying to cater to. And all of this introduction to say how, and I'm very mindful that I'm asking this question to one of the world foremost researchers on categories, how something like the category of influencer, which now everyone knows, how that becomes a thing. The very long intro to ask you what advice you have for entrepreneurs, whether it's content creators or someone that is like doing another one-person startup. How can they create a category? And instead of trying to dominate a category that already exists, how can they make a name for themselves and thrive with that little business?
Well, it's very difficult to do, but people do it and succeed at it. So it's worth saying the odds are long, but they're non-zero.
And arguably, the odds have become better because of AI tools.
Definitely. I mean, you couldn't be a solo creator in the world of media and get audiences in the sizes that you see with many people who are doing this still largely as a solo act. And even people who have, 10 or 20 million, those are big audiences for online creators. They have relatively smallish organizations. They're not hundreds of employees. It's maybe a couple of dozen, 3 dozen, maybe only 10 or 15, so that's amazing. That's really cool. Like how you think about what that looks like. I think the you do you thing that I was saying earlier, and being a category, and can you be a category somehow? Yes and no. So there's a difference between identity and category. So when you have an identity, that identity might be subsumed in a category that other people are in, but you might be known. Like you stand out.
As like podcaster, or podcast is the category.
Let's say, that, yeah. So you're a podcaster, that's your category, but you got a following and people see what you're doing and they love it and they have a relationship with each other, with you. I mean, that's the whole promise of this space. So you might not need to be your own category to do that. You might just need to be really good at having an identity that people vibe with. That's a thing. That's great. If you are doing a kind of approach that is different enough from what people have seen before, that it's kind of hard to say, for example, and we don't really have this now, so I don't even know what it would look like, but I'm just going to make it up. There are podcasters and then there's me. And you see, I'm not a podcaster. I'm a modcaster. Oh, what is that? That doesn't sound like a thing. I've never heard of it. You're the only person ever. I can ignore you. That's the way it typically goes. So what would you have to have happen, to go from the world where people just go, yeah, you're a legend in your own mind. There is no such a thing. I can safely ignore you. What's the difference between that and, oh, modcaster's the next big thing? How does that happen? Well, how it happens is by a collective process of sense making, whereby people say, that is different. And it's weird. I don't know how many people like it, but it's different. So I'm going to give you that. I'm not going to follow you. But then somebody says, oh, I'm going to follow you because that works for me. And then somebody says that to somebody else, and it just bubbles out to the point where now there's still a lot of people who think podcasters so weird, don't get it. But, there's a bunch of people who are like, yeah, I'm on board. Ditched all my podcasts, modcast only from now, and obviously I know this sounds silly, but this is kind of how it happens, right? So, why do we talk about podcasts now instead of online radio programs or online talk radio? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't care. I know enough to say podcasts are a thing. Right. And so many people do too. So it's that collective sense-making process of comparison. So the biggest mistake that people make when they want to seek first mover advantage, and to use a strategy term, as some kind of innovator or entrepreneur, is they desperately want the whole new thing to be named after what they do. And we have a lot of evidence that says when you're doing something different, if there aren't people doing the same different thing as you're doing, even if you're different from each other in some way, people are going to look at you and be like, yeah, I can safely ignore that. So finding people who are doing something like you are doing and calling attention to them in the era where the category that you're trying to be hasn't really landed, that's a good idea. So it's exactly the opposite of a USP, unique selling proposition. You don't want a unique selling proposition. You want a thing in common with other people.
Because you're too unique.
You're just weird. Yeah. You need to have some other weirdos with you to come be doing the thing. That validates what you're doing. And unless and until you have that validation, seeking out, pointing that out, drawing the comparisons, pointing people, generously to what you're doing, seemingly like nonsensically, it's actually de-risking the fact that no one will ever pay attention to your category. Once the category is established, don't do that anymore.
It's like the first podcasters, before podcasting was this thing, they would say, I'm a podcaster, and they would tell other podcasters, also say you're a podcaster, point people to me, and I'll point people to you to say I'm also a podcaster like him, and then we're gonna make that a thing, and then now everyone knows what a podcast is, so everyone tries to be super unique. So the takeaway, I think like what you said could be summarized by what Gandhi said. Is funny that I'm thinking of Gandhi, but I think he said, first they'll ignore you, then they'll criticize you, they'll fight you, and then you win.
Yeah, I mean, the kiss of death is to be ignored. I mean, that's where it all starts. So being a member of a category, this is the way I like to think about categories. A category is a definition for a thing in the world that you're asking somebody to put a space in their brain to hold that. People are just not looking for rent-free spaces to give away to you.
You need to be cool and unique enough that you have the privilege to have real estate in their brain.
A category is your idea of how you're telling people should organize their ontologies or taxonomies about what's in the world, that you're doing like Inception style, planting in people's brains, only they're awake. They're not dreaming, there's no drugs involved, and they have to buy the idea from you. So, and then once it's there, you and everybody like you lives rent-free in their heads. You don't pay for that. So you think about it, that's an enormous advantage. It's a great good that happens. This is why I think it's an important topic in strategy. But, it's not something that you can easily control because there's no copy paste all into people's heads. There's no function for that in real life. Even, conventional media, which used to do a lot of that, people could be like, yeah, I don't trust that, so it happens organically. You want to pay attention and not worry. Like if there's 5 different ways that a nascent category could be described or named, and your favorite one, which you're the best example of, is the one that isn't working, give it up. Let it go. Listen to Frozen, sing the song out loud. Just let it go, and then join with the others and compete.
Okay. we have a closing tradition on this podcast. I'll ask you a question on balance and a question on breakthrough. What's the worst advice you've gotten on living a balanced life?
To live a balanced life. I mean, I'm not a terribly balanced person in some ways. And if I followed the prescriptions of, a certain kind of person who wanted me to have a balanced life, I'd be a less happy person. So I think what I would say is interrogate what balance means and find your version of balance. And resist, it's awfully tempting, but resist being one of these preachy people who goes around and tells everybody that you found the secret of balance and they should do it exactly like you say.
Nice. I can relate to that. I think life comes in seasons, and if you have buckets, if many different buckets like work, life, health, relationships that you want to have balanced, at different times, probably a bucket will have a higher priority than the other. And that's perfectly fine as long as you know that it's temporarily imbalanced and you know how to sequentially have it balanced.
Yeah, like when my kids were young, I was, balanced not to being all in on my career. And that worked for me. I'm glad I did.
And if you had the chance to pursue one breakthrough in your life or in the world, and you knew you couldn't fail at that thing, what would you do?
I'm torn between a couple of things. We talked earlier about this additive AI stuff that I'm interested in. And, my ambition with that is to help people not be chumps in all this and to create work for people. I think that's super important. But I mean, I can see 1,000 ways I'd fail at that. So it's hard for me to do the counterfactual that says, I know it's going to succeed.
You couldn't fail.
I know. But I would like that not to fail. But I think the other way I would think about this is I would just pick something that is not so, geared toward like this massive world-changing type impact. And I know that sounds like...
What would Mark Kennedy do?
Well, I think, like, I spent some time thinking about some things that I really want to do this morning, and they were all very granular. They were very, in a way, small ambitions, but they were specific to people and situations that I care about. Like, I want to do this with that person. I want to do this for that person. And like, I think sometimes people spend so much time thinking about how they delusionally are going to change the world that they just miss the opportunity to do the good that's right in front of them. So to me, the breakthrough is to pick the things where you can have that certainty that you're, giving me as the imaginary, get out of jail free card, or you can do whatever you want. Like, once you start picking things that you can do, and you do it, and you see, oh my gosh, that was amazing, then like really great things come from that. So like I am personally doing this now. I'm picking places where I feel like when I'm doing something, I'm pushing on an open door. And I'm going through a lot more doors that are opening because of that, which wish I'd figured that out sooner.
What great advice to finish this episode with. Push on open doors, know your skills, know what you're good at, and see what you can do right in front of you instead of being distracted. Thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for getting through the whole episode. If you liked it, if you got any value out of it, please subscribe. As you know, 80% of you watching are actually not subscribed. If you got any value, this is the biggest thing to help us grow the show, get on bigger guests. If this resonated, please share it with a friend, tell someone about it, and we'll see you in the next episode.